Well, howdy, this is Mrs. Becky again, and I'm going to explain how to do F11 in IXL Precalculus, and that's going over the domain and the range of polynomials with their graphs. I don't think we have any equations, but this should not be that long. Just to review that the domain of a graph is or an equation is going to be the x value. So when we're talking about the domain, it's how many possible x values are included in that function, and then the range is we're focused on the y values, and that would be looking at it vertically. Um, if you forget, if you're goofy like me, I would always remember that just like the Y kind of goes down like this, the G sort of goes down like that. So Y is the range. That's a little thing that helped me. Anyway, we're going to be looking at the end behavior of these graphs. And again, the end behavior is where these arrows pointing off to, and and how do we describe that? There's another thing on here. They mention, not in the problems really, but they mention it in the instructions that the absolute maximum, this is the maximum value of this graph. That's as high as it's ever going to get. So that is going to be the absolute maximum value, which is uh, where y equals 5. That's the maximum value on that. Um, then to find the domain of this graph, again, we're going to look over here. This is where x is heading to the negative infinity. This is where x is heading off towards positive infinity. And then for the y-axis, these larger numbers up here, oops, are positive infinity. Oh my, just deal with it. And these are negative infinity values. The farther you're going down on y, you're going down to negative infinity. So the domain on this graph, we're going to start, we're looking at the x values. So as this graph is going down, think about how far it's eventually going to go out towards negative infinity. Well, since it's not straight up and down, it's slightly slanted. Eventually, when you go on and on and on, it's heading out towards negative infinity. So this is heading towards negative infinity. Again, the domain we're looking at are the x values. So the domain is heading towards negative infinity, that way. And then if you look at the right side, as the x values are heading out to positive infinity this way, it's just going to keep going and going and going. So the domain is going to go from negative infinity. The farther that this goes out, it's going to continue heading in that direction towards positive infinity, if that makes sense. I mean, eventually, see, as it's going on and on and on, these numbers are going up higher and higher. So the domain would be this symbol here, and they've written it as the domain is from negative infinity this way. As the farther you go out this way towards the negative, this graph eventually is going to show up somewhere. Same thing over here. You start going towards positive infinity, and you don't have to put the positive sign. That's terrible. It's going to continue to go. The graph is going to exist way out there. So that's the domain. Now the range is going to be a little bit different, because as we're looking down here, the range down towards negative infinity, the graph is showing that it's going to continue down. So the range will exist down there on all these negative values for y. But as you go up higher and higher towards positive infinity, go up there, it stops. This is where it caps off. That's the highest y value that's ever going to exist on this graph. So we would write it, comma, which is what that is. This tells us that the max value for the y value stops at positive 5. And we put this bracket to show that that point is actually included on the graph. We put a parenthesis to show that that point isn't really included on the graph, and because we're talking about infinity and it never ends, so you can't really like pinpoint place, if that makes sense. So if we look at this graph over here, we want to find the domain and the range. So domain are all of the x values. So as we're looking this way, this as it increases up this way, these x values are going to continue out. So you could keep going this way, and like if you went way out here, then you went way up, because this is slanted, eventually the graph is going to be there. We're looking for where is that graph going to exist. So the graph is going to exist at the x values at negative infinity. So in other words, you could continue out towards negative infinity on the x axis, and you're going to be able to go up and find a y value. Put your comma. Now, what about this way, towards positive infinity? As you're heading out this way, you could end up going down, and that graph is actually going to exist. So the domain is all the positive, negative infinity up to positive infinity. Sorry about that. Writing. Oh, that's horrible writing. So the range, we're focusing on how high and how low that it would go. Well, on the negative values down here, since it's showing that it's continuing on down that way, going on and on and on, it's going to go from negative infinity. And as we go up, these are not absolute values. These are just bumps in the road. It's because the graph doesn't stop there. So as you go up, 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 the graph is going to exist up here. So we would say that the range goes from, it's going to, sorry, it's going to exist down here on these negative numbers, and it's going to continue to go on up there in those positive numbers. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, look at these next graphs. We'll go through these pretty quickly, hopefully. All right, we're looking for the domain first. So the x values they're going to go on forever. So they go from negative infinity to positive infinity, which, excuse me, this is going to be the domain right there. And then the y values are going to be from, wait a minute, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, negative infinity down here. But the highest that it's going to go is going to be up here. The absolute highest it's going to go is going to be at 5. So the range is going to be this one. And again, that absolute max is at 5. I'm looking at this next one, example number 4. The range, which eventually it's going to hit all of these in either direction, just because again of that little tilt to the line there. So the domain is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity, and the range is going to be it doesn't go down to the negative infinity, it goes down to -1 right there, but it will continue up to positive infinity, and that's going to be this one. So that's the range. And notice again that when there's actual cap off for a value there, they use the bracket. Same thing that they did here. That tells us that that -1 is included and that 5 is included. On example number 5, the x values are it's gonna hit all of those x values. So this one is gonna be the domain. The range is going to be up to, what does that say, 6? Yeah, it's ever gonna go only up to 6, but it's gonna continue down, so it's gonna be this one, the negative infinity up to positive 6. Um, then on this one, the domain is gonna be all of the x infinity, negative infinity values, and the y values are gonna stop at -7. So it's gonna be this one, -7, onward up to positive infinity. Okay, last screen with these examples. This one is continuing on. It's going to go in both directions. I think X one is probably harder to be able to tell, but hopefully they're catching on just by looking at it, that the domain for the X values is going to go from negative to positive infinity, and then also for the range, because the graph is going continually down and continually up. Then on this one, the x values will continue on and on and on, so that's infinity. The range, the y values, are going to go as low as -3, on up to infinity, and that would be that one. On this one, you're going to that it's going to the x values will continue both ways, so that the domain is infinity, and it's going to be the same thing for the range. And this graph is pretty similar to this one. It just has some jigs in the road there. So both of those, domain and range, will also be on to infinity and beyond. And that was pretty cheesy. So I think you can do this section now. You should probably do all right. Thank you and see you next time.